Good afternoon. Great to be speaking with you. This is take 3. I was sharing earlier that I've changed location. I've come down to the church today because yesterday at home with 4 children having online schooling that our internet was not coping, but I'm at the church today and the internet seems to be struggling here as well, as there are lots of people using the internet at the moment. Well, let's have another go and hopefully I can finish this time. At the moment, we're working our way through Mark chapter 14 and 15, and we are in the lead up to Easter. Great that I can see Luke. There's actually someone that has caught up with my new stream. We're looking at Mark chapter 14 and 15 in the lead up to Easter and following Jesus towards the cross. So let me read chapter 14 verses 32 to 42. 32 to 42 of chapter 14, Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Then I'll make a few comments. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," he said to them. "Stay here and keep watch." Going a little farther, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible, the hour might pass from him. "Abba, Father," he said, "everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Simon," he said to Peter, "are you asleep? Couldn't you keep watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Once more, he went away and prayed the same thing. When he came back, he again found them sleeping, because their eyes were heavy. They did not know what to say to him. Returning the 3rd time, he said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Enough! The hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." Now today, as I look at this famous section of Scripture, Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, I just want to kind of note a few things about the way Jesus prays. What can we learn from Jesus as he prays in a moment of crisis, a moment of great challenge in his life? He's in the last 24 hours of his life, to die the next day, and we see that he's in great anguish. Have a look at verse 34. Where it says, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." He said to him, "Stay here and keep watch." We see the content of his prayer in verse 36, where he says, "Abba, Father, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, not what I will, but what you will." So let's just step back and consider what we can learn about how Jesus prays in this moment of crisis. And the first thing that really struck me as Jesus prays here is the priority that he gives to prayer. Have a look at verse 32. They've just enjoyed the Last Supper together, and then they went to a place called Gethsemane. And Jesus said to them, "Sit here while I pray." Jesus' first priority, his first instinct in this moment of crisis in his life was to pray. Now that challenges me. I don't know about you, but what is your first instinct to do in a moment of challenge, a moment of crisis? Is it to pray? Or is it to rely on your own strength, as we were seeing with Peter yesterday? Well, it's definitely not the disciples' first instinct wasn't to pray. We see that the disciples in this little episode, their first instinct is to sleep. And that can be a great challenge for us. As well as we're seeking to pray, to be sleepy, to be distracted. But Jesus was focused. And we see that in the second thing, particularly that we notice about the way Jesus prays in this section. The second thing that really stood out to me was the passion that Jesus had as he prayed. Have a look at verse 35. It says, "Going a little farther, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible, the hour might pass from him. And then he says, Abba, Father. So we get this image of Jesus falling to the ground on his face, pleading with his Father that he would take this cup from him, calling out, Abba, Father. He has great passion and focus as he prays to his Father here. And we see that he repeats his prayer 3 times. We see that in verse 39. Once more, he went away and prayed the same thing. He continues to plead for the same thing. And then in verse 41, he says, returning the 3rd time, he said to them. And so Jesus here is passionate and pleading repeatedly for the same thing. And we see that his prayer was long and it was intense. Have a look at verse 37. The end of verse 37, it says, couldn't you keep watch for 1 hour? And so we see here that Jesus was praying for at least an hour of focused, passionate pleading about the same thing. And isn't that just a real challenge to us? I don't know when the last time was that you spent an hour passionately pleading with God for the same thing. It is a great example. And I was really challenged just thinking of what we're going through at the moment, thinking, wouldn't it be great to just set aside an hour to passionately pray for what our world is going through at the moment, to plead with him to have mercy upon our world. So Jesus has great priority here. He has great passion. And the third thing that struck me was his submission to the Father's will. Have a look at verse 36. He says, Abba, Father, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. Now, it's natural to stop when we're praying about a great challenge or in a moment of crisis, to stop our prayers halfway through this verse. Everything is possible for you, God. Take this cup from me. Take this suffering from me. And that's something it's right to do that. It's natural to do that. Jesus does that. It's right for us to pray that the suffering would end. But notice how Jesus finishes his prayer. He says, not what, in verse 36, yet not what I will, but what you will. Now, sometimes when we're going through suffering, we naturally want it to stop, but do we actually pray that the Father's will would be done? And I know sometimes I found it challenging when I'm praying for others going through suffering, how easy it is to not pray that, Father, let your will be done, that as though it's a bit of a cop-out in some way, or a lack of faith, that we're praying that the Father's will would be done, as though we're not fully confidently praying that this can happen. But Jesus, this is how Jesus prays. And I think it's a reminder to us of remembering that Jesus knows what is best. Jesus knows